Hey, welcome everybody to Pro Mindset Podcast. This is your host, Craig Domann. I'm in a remote location today, but we have a special guest by way of St. Louis. Her name is Dr. Amy Loden Tiffany, and Amy is a medical doctor. She's a super mom. She is going to share with us her wisdom in balancing lots of balls. She has a family of 5, and she has a set of twin boys that are 6. Amy, welcome to Pro Mindset.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Okay. Share with us your story. Kind of give us the background of what you do, why you do what you do, those type of things.
Sure. So I grew up in Missouri, local to the area, and really had a very blessed childhood. Never questioned that I wanted to be a doctor. Always knew I wanted to be a mom, but didn't necessarily have the equipped tools to get there from a mindset and a habit perspective. So one of the things that I do now in helping our clients in St. Louis is to develop those same things. So we reverse engineer the habits and mindsets they're needed to make the health outcomes they want. And the people that we serve are generally women who are in their 30s to 60-year range. They're postpartum. They are trying to improve their health. They're running corporations. They're running their homes. And we do that starting around 30 all the way to the 60s because perimenopause and menopause is a real problem for a lot of women. It's also a lot of problems for the children and significant others living with them. And so we are very tuned into that. And the reason I work with this and we reverse engineer it backwards instead of just handing them a prescription and saying, good luck, go, which is what typically traditional medicine does, is because I had a lived experience where I was the patient and I had a near-death experience with my twins. And I realized that what we all know at some point we're going to die, but I realized I might not have the same lifespan that I assume anyone else would have. So if I can make the most impact in a shorter time, I want to do that. So that is why I focus my energy in the work I do. And that is why we help the people we do.
That's awesome. So let's dive into that near-death experience. So obviously being pregnant is a super dope thing for women and for the men too. Got one on the way coming in December.
Congrats.
Here in 4 or 5 weeks. What happened? Describe to the audience, what happened to you?
So I was 30 weeks pregnant with twins. That was I had 2 older children already. I was working in a corporate clinic. I had about 3,000 patients and I was doing general internal medicine care. That's what my training is in. And I, over the weekend, was like, man, my leg's really hurting. Something's wrong. So told my husband, I don't have any patients today. Let's go over to the hospital and just get it checked out. And that started a week journey of realizing the reason I was in pain and so many things were happening was because I was in preeclampsia. And preeclampsia does not affect any pregnancy, but if it happens to you, it's 100% of your pregnancy. And so they told me, listen, you're here till at least 34 weeks. We're going to try to get you to 34 weeks with these twins because that's an outcome measure for them. Obviously, 37 weeks may not happen, but let's try for 34. And we made it to 31. My water broke. My heart started failing. My liver and kidneys weren't working. My lungs were filling with fluid. I couldn't walk across my hospital room without gasping for breath, all within a span of 6 days. 2 kids at home, 3,000 patients that I wasn't ready for maternity leave yet, right? So it was an extraordinarily stressful situation and you can't undo some memories. And one memory from that is sitting on the hospital bed, trying to breathe, trying to speak to the doctor who is there. And she's telling me the reason you can't breathe is your lungs are filling with water. And as a medical doctor, my first inclination was just, well, give me some medicine. I'll be fine, right? Like we don't need to deliver today. We can hold this off. We've got this. And she basically said, you have 2 options. We can do it your way. And you can go to the ICU with a tube in your throat because you can't breathe. Or we can do it my way and we can do a C-section tonight, an emergency C-section, and you can potentially go to the NICU and hold your babies tonight. It was stark in her mind. And I was like, well, you put it that way. Maybe I should go with your way. And that was a really scary night because you don't know with pregnancy-induced heart failure and preeclampsia if you'll recover. So it was the beginning of a very long journey. The boys spent 11 weeks in the NICU, a lot of time to pray and to think and to ponder what happened and why and how can this be used for good. And it really reset my thinking about what is a good mom? What is a good doctor? How do I show up in both of those roles to the degree that I want to do? And how do I do it with excellence? And I wasn't quite ready at that point in my life to leave the practice I was in. But over the next 12 to 18 months, as I continued to work on these ideas of mindset and how do I make different decisions and conscious, intentional plans, I got to the point where one night, my then 7-year-old oldest child came up to me and said, "Are you buying my birthday gifts?" And I was like, "No, I'm working. I work every night," right? Kind of sarcastically. And tired and go finish Paw Patrol, and then I'll put you to bed, because obviously that, sarcastically, of course, is the definition of a good mother. Didn't even hear myself, but she didn't leave. She just stood there, and I looked at her, and she's got tears filling her blue eyes, and the tears just start falling down her cheeks, and I'm horrified. Like, I don't know why she's crying. And she finally gets out the question, "Mommy, why do you love your job more than me?" And that shattered me. I knew in that moment that it was so clear to me, everything had to change, even more than I had realized through that near-death experience. And I went to my husband, I said, "Listen, this isn't working. We have 4 kids. I have a full-time practice. Like, I either need to retire or I need to do something different." And he looked at me just as seriously, and I kid you not, he said, "You are not retiring." And I'm pretty sure it's because he knew my love for what I do, but he also knew that if I was at home full-time, I would drive him crazy. So he said, "You're not retiring." Within 4 months, we started Vitality, and that was the beginning of the new story from 5 years ago.
Okay, so for 5 years, you've been coaching mostly mothers to say they can have it all, basically.
In a way they define, because having it all is often defined by other people. So what brings value to them? How do they see that value? What do they define success looks like? It may be the same way as someone else has already defined it, but so many times we buy into someone else's definition of success and apply it to ourselves, and it's not our story.
Okay. So one thing that hit me when your 7-year-old daughter asked you what she asked you and you responded the way you responded was the concept that every single kid wants their parents to be 100% locked in, present, responsive, focused, all those things when they want. Now, there's a lot of times they don't want you, but so how do you coach people, coach parents, coach women to be all they need to be when they need to be it?
Yes.
Because there's so many tugs and pulls on our day.
Correct. So some of the things we talk about, for example, as a medical doctor, I get a lot of patients who call me after hours. They need help after hours, right? I'm with my family. So I have to, in that moment, make a conscious decision of I'm going to talk to this patient, and I want my kid to know that they matter to me. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll call the patient back and say, "Listen, I'm doing some things with my kids. I'm going to call you back at a set time." Other times I tell my kid, based on what their discussion is, "This is really important to me that I hear what you have to say. And right now, I'm going to pay 100% attention to you. And then I need to make this phone call." Sometimes it's a phone call from the hospital, and I know I need to do it in the reverse order. And so I assume that women are the experts in their life. I assume they know how to prioritize the different calls that they're getting. What I also tell them is they don't have to do everything and be everything in each role. So what does a good mom look like? Every person defines that for themselves. What does a good fill in the blank career person look like? You have to define that. Because if you don't, you'll find yourself with unmet expectations when you can't get all the cooking done, you can't get all the cleaning done, the trash cans are overflowing, the kids are running around like banshees, and your husband wants to pull out his hair, right? Not to mention how you feel about yourself because you haven't taken time to eat, rest, sleep, go to the bathroom, whatever. So what we coach is you have to make decisions ahead of time, and you have to know what's important to you. And what's important to you in your 30s may be different than it was in your 20s. And that's okay. That's growth. But we have to get away from the idea that doing it all means the same thing for every person. And so understanding what is important to you. For me, it's very clear. My faith, my family, my fitness. If something's not hitting those 3 targets, then I just need to say no. And saying no is really hard for everyone, but particularly for women.
Where do you start? I want to sign up and I want to define success. Where do you start?
We start with values, and we start with understanding what a value even is. That's not something we learn in school, and yet we should. What are those things that are important to us? And sometimes you start with a very generic list of words. And then as you start working somebody through these words and saying what resonates with you, they start to realize, oh, it's not really honesty that's important to me. It's transparency or it's authenticity, and really starting to drill down. And then reflecting back to them, what does, say, authenticity look like to you? What does it mean to you? How does it show up in your daily actions? If I'm going to pick on the authenticity for a moment, but if that is your value, then what does that look like when it comes to your health? Are you living authentic decisions that give you authentic health, or are you eating things that are going to lead you down a road that doesn't give you your best health choice? Are you not sleeping authentically? Are you not relationally developing and growing authentically? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So number 1 is basically introducing everyone to the concepts of value and helping them define it.
Correct.
And then integrating that into their Monday mornings, to their Saturday nights, to
Exactly.
daily life, and then helping them be proactive so that when it happens, it's not a surprise.
Right.
You were already ready for that.
Yes.
And you know how to respond.
What I have seen in about 15 years of working as a medical doctor is that people know the basics. They know they need good sleep, to exercise, to eat, etc. That's not a question. But what nobody does well and understands well is how do I make that happen in my life today? And so it was really frustrating to me that I would have these what I thought were great patient encounters, and 6 months later, the patient would come back and they had no change. It really doesn't work in the healthcare system to tell people to go change on their own. You have to have accountability. You have to have a strategy that makes sense in your life. And it has to be aligned with where you want to go. So the first step is figuring out values. But the next step is, if your values are aligned, what's the impact you want to have? That was the question I found myself answering in those weeks in the NICU is, I'm predicted now, because of preeclampsia, I'm predicted to die before I'm 60. We don't know when we're going to die. No one does, right? But if that's the algorithm prediction, what do I want to get done before I'm 60? What legacy do I want to leave for my family? What impact do I want to have on my community? And what do I need to change that's not aligned with that? And so we help them work through what is the impact you want to have in your specific industry. And I include stay-at-home moms at this because that is a full-time job in itself, and they are raising the next generation of people who are going to potentially lead our country. In my mind, a CEO mom is someone who has to make decisions, and I don't know many moms that don't have to make decisions.
Well, when you talk about CEO moms, the ones that get the least amount of credibility and respect and recognition are the stay-home moms.
Correct. Yes.
But I would say that most men that have any awareness at all would say that without their super mom at home, things would fall apart.
Correct.
Something popped in my mind, Amy, and that is that when somebody tells you that you're most likely to die before 60, is that a label? Is that a concept that you adopt, or is it not?
So me personally, I refuse it because I refuse to accept that there's nothing I can do. I think there's always something you can do. And I've seen too many people develop a mindset of, I'm going to die at 60, so too bad, so sad. And maybe I do die at 60, but maybe I don't. Right? And how much regret would I have if I didn't go all out, whether it's to 60 or 120? So I don't know the number of days that God's allotted me. I know that I'm here today to make an impact in the people in front of me and the people that live with me. And I am committed to making sure I do that to the best of my abilities. Doesn't mean it's perfect. There's a lot of, ask any of my kids and they can tell you where I do not do it perfectly. Just ask my husband. But that doesn't mean the mindset doesn't need to be all in, because when you have an arbitrary deadline, like so many people do, because no one knows, it doesn't give the sense of urgency that it does if you're told there's a good chance you're going to die before 60, right? And so for me, that urgency, that deadline of let's beat the record, let's go against the odds, let's prove that it's possible, is very empowering. For some people, it's overwhelming. And so for some people, we work in a different way. But for me personally, I don't know. But I'm not going to sit here and wait around for it to happen. I'm going to do what I can to live with no regrets.
Let's jump to faith. That was your number one. What is your faith?
Yes, I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian. And for me, that shows up in trying to lead my decisions in a way that honors Jesus Christ. That does not happen consistently. And I will be the first to tell you there's a lot of people who've claimed Christianity that hurt a lot of people. So I don't in any way want to cover up that. But I do believe if we live the principles that Jesus taught, and if we, as Christians, line our choices up with that, it affects our giving. It affects how we use our time. It affects our business decisions, how we practice our ethics. It affects our relationships. For me, it shows up in the fact that while I'm a medical doctor, I'm also homeschooling my oldest child. And we feel very strongly that there's a need for that in her specific circumstance. It also shows up in the fact that I have a 4-month foster baby living at my house, because that child needed someone. And in that moment, I was the one who had the option to step up or to step out. And my faith fueled that. I had no doubt, and still today, no matter how hard it's been, have no doubt that this is exactly where I'm supposed to be doing what I am. And my faith aligns my decisions.
How does faith show up in your health?
Many people may have heard the concept of your body being the temple of the Holy Spirit. That's a real common church term. I think God holds us responsible for the decisions we make. And when it comes to health, for me, if I am eating Doritos all day, if I am not getting enough sleep when I should, I'm sacrificing part of the now for the what could be. I'm not living for the future person I'm designed to become. I'm making too easy quick decisions. That's real easy to do when you're tired and sleep deprived and you have a job inside or outside the home. It could be overwhelming. And so for my health, I have to root myself in making a decision every day. If I'm going to spend time reading and studying the scriptures, I'm going to make decisions on my health that is for my mental health. That is for my relational health. It helps me decide then how to use my time the rest of the day for when am I going to be physically active? What am I going to eat? When am I going to go to bed? So for me, it's very integrated into my health. I wish more people would consider that possibility because I don't think that's something that the church globally has taught well. And yet, if I'm going to make the argument that I'm God's creation, then I should be honoring that just as much as I want to take care of the environment and help it be as beautiful as God created it to be.
How is your faith integrated into your family?
Again, with the being able to specialize for my children's needs. And so with my daughter, we realized that she had the capacity to learn in a different way. So making the decision for my children that my business serves my family does not serve my business. That's what I had wrong all those years ago, was my family was being subjected to the business rather than the business serving my family. For my children, I have girl, a boy, twin identical boys, and then the foster baby. So for my older boy, how that shows up with him, he's a very different personality. He needs a lot more challenge and he thinks about things differently. And so having more conversations and philosophical thoughts with him is how the faith integrates with him. With the little boys, it's just trying to keep up with them and trying to help them understand, why do we say that we don't lie? Why are we, as Tiffany's, why do we say one of our family values is to be trustworthy? Why does that matter? Because, the Bible says don't lie. So different ways that it shows up with different children and at different times in their life or ours.
What are your top family values that you're passing on to your kids?
So I am in process of I'm super excited about this. They may not be, but what we're making is a family acronym. And so Tiffany is our family name. T is for trustworthy. And we've been talking a lot about what does trustworthy mean. I is inspiring. Tiffany's are inspiring people, and so on down the acronym, which we're still developing, where each week we're building out different parts of it. But we will have a collection of 7 values that define who we are as Tiffany's. Because just like any other group, the military, the global community, and different churches, everyone has values, right? And so if we can align and say, this is our family, this is what we stand for, we are truth tellers, we are inspiring, we do the things that are hard when it's hard anyway, because that's who we are. That gives children a platform from which to build. So that is actually something that's in process. And I'll have to get back to you on how that works out, but I'm super excited about it.
That's awesome. So you said you have 6-year-old identical twin boys.
Correct. Yes.
How do you make them feel unique and special when everybody else can't tell them apart, most likely?
They can't. And I get asked all the time which one's which. Side note, they have not figured out how to play this game yet with teachers where they switch positions. So I haven't figured out the answer to that question because I know it's coming. But I got some advice in Walgreens of all places when the twins were very young. And this gentleman had twins. He saw me printing pictures of twins. It says, I have twins. And he said, one thing that I would encourage you to do to keep them feeling special is that you alternate days where one of them is in charge of decisions that they are allowed to make. And so one of the boys gets odd days, one of the boys gets even days. And when it's their day, they get all the treats. They get to be first in line. They get to be first in line to pick the show if we're watching a show. They get to be first in line to pick where they sit in the car. Like there's special things that they would normally fight over. And so anything they would normally fight over becomes, nope, it's an odd day. So we're going to give that one to Zach. It's an even day. Jace, this is you. And they love that system. So much that when they go to their grandparents' house now, I have to remind the grandparents, we use this system. If you do not use this, your life will be chaotic because they will fight about it. And it works great. The other thing that we do is they have their own colors. So in the NICU, we decided that Jace was always going to be wearing 2 colors so people could tell him apart, and Zach would wear the other 2 colors. And we just have gone so hardcore on that even their shoes are their color. And so it's been so helpful because all their friends who otherwise couldn't see a difference between them can look at their colors and know, I'm playing with Jace or I'm playing with Zach. And their teachers now aren't just saying it's the twins, right? It's Zach or it's Jace. And they get much more individualized just by those 2 little strategies.
The color thing is so simple, but I can see how that plays out
Huge
in
impact.
school.
Huge
with
impact.
Friends everywhere.
Yes.
No, that's amazing. Keep going. Sorry to interrupt you.
Nope, you're good.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah. So that and which days they get are the 2 big things. The other thing we do is they do have different personalities. People want to pigeonhole them, and their preschool and I went round and round on this for a while of with identical twins specifically, it's old science, but there is some science that says that they actually do better educational capacity if you will keep them together until they're ready to split versus fraternal twins, whether they're boy, boy, girl, girl, or boy and girl. Those sets, you can split them up and they don't have the different outcomes. So there's something about identical twins and education settings where they should be together. Again, old research, but I fought for it. And I did not want them to be lumped in together as so many people think twins are. They'll say, well, one's going to be stronger than the other. And that's not true in my experience. I do think that one of them is more strategic than the other and the other's more spontaneous. And you put that together and you end up with socks in the toilet. And both of them pointing at the other one is for the reason there's socks in the toilet. But you have to really look at each kid, I think, just like you would if they weren't twins, right? You would figure out what are those kids' needs, what are their opportunities, what do they do well, and you go with it. So that's what we do.
Okay, let's talk about blind spots for a second. You help people, and a lot of times they can't see what you can see. How do you help people work through their blind spots, and what are the most common blind spots for CEO moms?
The number one blind spot for CEO moms that we work on over and over is they don't know that the decisions they're making today are building the future they're going to live in 30 years. So you have to reverse engineer the outcome you want. And the way I help them see this is as part of what we do their annual wellness visit, but we actually do a real innovative, tailored annual longevity visit after that, where I sit down with them and it's a 3 to 5 page report of all their health trajectories, their strengths, their outcomes, where do we need to go? And one of the things we talk about is their life expectancy. And that's not something that you have most doctors talking to you about in an annual conversation is how long are you projected to live? But life insurance companies have figured this out. So I just take the data that life insurance companies have. They publish this for free. You can do your own life expectancy calculator. And then I say, if you're projected to live to 85, what does 84 look like? Are you in a nursing home, in a wheelchair, or are you marching across Europe, touring the mountains with your kids and grandkids? Which picture do you want? Because the decisions you're making today are going to give you that picture. It really does make a difference what you do in your 30s, 40s, and 50s for the picture you experience in your 80s. And that is just not a conversation I saw modeled in medical school. It wasn't at residency. I trained at one of the most elite places in the world for residency, and I never heard this conversation. I don't think we're doing a good job of it in healthcare. And then we get to the end of life and we're like, oh, gee, now mom's in a wheelchair. What are we going to do with her? Is that really the way we want to live our lives and treat the people who are special to us? To me, that's just bizarre. And so we, in my opinion, should be having these conversations much, much earlier, decades before this happens, because it takes that long to create a runway in which you can do something. It creates that long to have habits that are sustainable, that give you that exponential value over time and the momentum to build. But that's the outcome most people think they want. I've never had someone take me up on the I want to be in a wheelchair in a nursing home story. Never, right? Because none of us want that. We've seen what that looks like and we don't want it, but yet our actions and our behaviors are not aligned with what we say we want.
What are the worst habits, actions, and behaviors that men and women have in their 30s, 40s, and 50s that is going to be a disaster in their 70s and 80s that they just don't think it's going to show up then? Specific.
Yep.
Habit.
The two habits by far, if I could change nothing else, but tell people they take nothing else away from this, do these two things. Number one is get sufficient sleep. I see professionals in their 30s, 40s, 50s, men and women who are not getting sufficient sleep. That is absolutely going to have health outcomes that are a result of your habits that are profound. The second one is physical inactivity. I've seen studies suggesting that maybe physical activity is actually worse, inactivity, is worse than smoking for your health. Think about that for a second. How many of us know not to smoke? Or if we smoke, we're like, I know I shouldn't do it, right? Like that is clear in our public health story. Physical inactivity being worse than that, that's just profound.
Okay, Doc, what's going to happen to all these kids that entertain themselves on their phone and they don't go out for sports as much?
Right.
They don't do as much. They don't go hiking on the weekends. They go on Netflix binges. Nothing wrong with any of that, but that's kind of the sedentary lifestyle that the Americans are living
right.
in a lot of places, especially the more densely populated, the more hassle it is to drive 30 minutes to the beach or go to the mountains, right?
Right.
You end up, sitting on the couch.
So there's data on this. A book was published not long ago, actually. You may have read The Anxious Generation. And it talks about what happened after the iPhone specifically came out. kids, I should say, became more digitally in tune with social apps and social activity, but also just the internet and not having the outdoors experience, the relational experience. And then COVID did not help at all. But the socialization experiences that many of us grew up with, there's really clear data that mental health is bad, but physical health outcomes are not better. And I think we're already seeing the impact of that in these young adults now, many who don't know how to deal with stress well. They don't have the resilience that was needed from playing on the playground with kids of all ages, from doing the hard stuff of the hike that wore you out, of going for the Eagle Scout badge, whatever the thing was that we all have our thing that made us better, right? It was hard. And because it was hard, we grew. And they don't have that. The other concern I have that I observe is many of those activities that you're referring to digitally are quick ons for dopamine release in the brain. They're highly addictive for a reason. They're designed to be addictive to keep us doing it, right? And adults have the same problem. But the difference in people under roughly 25 is that their brains are still developing versus the adult brain, what we think is the mature adult brain, being in a different state. You give me enough social cues on an app, on a phone, that I get dopamine reward, I'm just going to keep doing it because dopamine feels good, right? Like instant gratification. The hard stuff, I don't get dopamine from that until I've done it for months or years. I may never get dopamine from it. And so that trade-off of what I get now versus who I want to be, how am I depriving my future self, is a conversation that really needs to wake up many, many leaders in our country and those who have influence over helping younger children, adolescents, and early adults, because they don't have that skill set from that very different upbringing.
How are you guiding your kids so that they don't fall into that trap? How are you encouraging them to go out for sports and activities and, singing and dancing, whatever it may be, so that they don't have this issue?
Yeah. So in addition to having just screen limits in general, the American Academy of Pediatrics has different numbers for different ages. So we definitely try to cap those and not do more than that. But we intentionally plan activities and we figure out, what do you like? My daughter loves volleyball. My boys like tennis. And so really going out, and sometimes that means I watch the younger ones and my husband goes and plays tennis with my older boy. Sometimes it means I take the little boys and the baby to the playground and they're at the playground instead, where they could be watching TV on a Saturday morning. It's not that these digital things in themselves are intrinsically evil, right? It's what we do with them. And if we don't do what we need to do in the created world, then we're going to have a problem because we don't know how to persevere physically or digitally when things get hard. And part of how most of us grew up playing most of us didn't necessarily go home until it got dark, or we rode our bikes without thinking about, am I on the right street? And mom and dad weren't necessarily always hovering. That changed. It changed significantly. And people got more worried about all the things they saw in the news, even though statistically those things were being less. And there's just really good data that we've lost something there. That exchange has not been fruitful.
Well, one thing that happens when it gets hard is you have to reset. And when a video game gets hard, the reset is start over. Just slide and play a new game. When you're 3 miles from home on a hike or a bike ride, and it gets hard, weather turns bad, you got to go back the same distance you just traveled, and there's no shortcut.
Correct.
That's when you grow. That's when you adapt. That's when neuroplasticity kicks in. You have more expansive thoughts and creative solutions, things like that. I want to go back to where we started. We started with you being a mom, you being pregnant with twins. For those ladies out there that are pregnant right now, what's the best advice let's say it's their first kid. What's the best counsel you could give them so that they can have the best connection with their child? They can have the healthiest child because that child is already live before it shows up through delivery.
Right.
It's listening, it's experiencing life long before. So take it away.
Yeah, I think especially if I think of myself in that position, what I wish I had known, it was develop the habits of self-care then, because it will be so much different when the baby comes. And that's what I wrote my book about, is how do you keep doing these habits after baby comes? And how do you integrate what's important to you? You have to know where you're starting from to grow forward, but you also have to give yourself permission to fail forward. And it's more important, I think, to understand that the fear of failure is much weaker than the fear of regret. When you look at the dying population of adults, the study has been in Australia, and it's been documented in multiple places in the world. When adults are dying, they don't regret having tried. They regret having never tried. And so that mom, she's going to make mistakes, right? And intellectually, we know this, but coming up with a plan for when I make that mistake, whether I'm pregnant or it's after, how am I going to use this as a fail forward moment? How am I going to be brave and do the hard things, even though I'm afraid I might fail? And I would say you're supposed to fail a little bit. You're supposed to. It's part of the process. Nothing has gone wrong. And that includes when your baby is screaming bloody murder and you have done everything you know to do, right? It does not mean that you're a failure. It means you haven't figured it out yet for that kid, for that relationship, for that time in your story with them. And that has been probably the number one thought that's helped me as I've gone through my journey is it's supposed to be hard. This isn't over yet. I just haven't figured out the right option, the right action yet. And that creates a very different space in your brain than saying, I'm a failure. I can't do this. Why did I want to go down this road? There's no hope. That's a horrible mental space, but creating room to grow and to fail forward, so valuable.
I think as a coach too, even in sports, you want players that are going to jump in the game. You don't want the guy or the girl that's going to sit on the bench and that doesn't, gets an opportunity to go in and chooses not to. You would much rather have the person go in and bomb.
Right.
And they identify the gap between where they are and where they were supposed to be.
Yes.
Or should. And the next time they can close that gap a little bit.
Right.
And it's a game of just trying to get better. And being a parent is the same way.
100%.
You will be a genius when your twins are 26.
I'll come back then and share my knowledge.
You're a genius now, but it's like you really will be because you will learn so many things through that journey. One of the things I would share with you with kids that are 26 as my youngest is they don't listen, but they're watching all the time and how you respond to your husband and how you respond to stress and how you take care of your own body and, how you deal with surprises and unexpected situations. How do you receive grace? How do you give grace?
Yes.
Conflict resolution, all those types of things. They don't even know what that means at the moment, but they're going to watch.
100%. The older they get, I don't know if you experience this, but I sense that the older my kids get, the whys have a different meaning. Why am I doing this is more about what's the long game and not just why am I doing this in the moment, whatever this is, homework, brushing your teeth, cleaning your room, whatever. But I find that there's a certain discipline and routine that kids need that is not something adults don't need. We just think we outgrew it. We still need the routine and the discipline and the feedback to become who we need to continue to be.
Share with us from your book, what's the number one thesis, the main thesis in your book?
So my book is set up on each of the lifestyle big silos, whether it's nutrition, activity, sleep, etc. It's based on the idea of name, notice, nudge. So you need to understand what you're dealing with. You need to name it. You need to notice how it's impacting your life. And then the nudge is what is the first next best step for this particular thing. And I'll share how this worked in my own life briefly. I was having a really hard time after the twins were born, getting my physical activity back up and going. I had the 4 kids. They were all under 7. I had the business. I was like, how in the heck am I supposed to get my activity in? And I did not have an hour to devote every day in a chunk. But what I discovered, 2 things. Number one is that I could break it into 2 30-minute sessions. Seems intuitive, right? But most of us don't think to do that. So I would walk for 30 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes after dinner. Game changer. I could get the activity in. The second thing is I really detest coming home after work and having to get changed into exercise shoes, and the change just for some reason feels very heavy to me to just change my clothes. But particularly my shoes, it drives me crazy. I'd be all the way down at the treadmill, for example, and then have to go all the way back upstairs. It's 20 feet, but my brain completely freaked out about it. So I just started leaving my tennis shoes on the treadmill. That was where they went. And that went away. Finding those little hacks for you is what coaching, I think, gives that no other profession helps you figure out. It would never have occurred to me before going through the experience that was the thing. Split it up and keep your shoes on the treadmill. But it made a lifetime of difference because I was then able to be physically active.
What do most women struggle with in those formation of name, notice, and nudge? Where do they fail the most?
Most of the time they have their priorities mismatched. They think they have a time management problem. They have a priority management problem. So if you don't understand, going back to our values, what your priorities are, then you're going to think you're doing the right thing, but you're going to be exerting your energy and time, maybe even your money, into the wrong areas. And many times this ends up being housework. not all the time, but for many women, it's a housework thing. I can't get all the housework done. And they instead do housework and sacrifice the relationship they could be spending with their children, with their significant other, or in their health, their faith, whatever, because they had to get the toilets cleaned. And that's a fundamental mismatch. And we have to give ourselves the gift of saying, this isn't your priority. Your priority, you just told me, were these values. So let's line up your actions with your values rather than trying to fit them in as a second thought.
And I would probably surmise that a lot of times they don't know that until they find out their priorities were out of alignment.
Correct.
When their kids say something to them, their spouse says something to them, their friend says something to them.
Right.
And then sometimes they still don't realize how to make the correction.
It is extremely difficult to do by yourself. Just to put that out there, if we were meant to walk this life alone, that's how we would have been created. But we were created for community, for interaction, for building each other up. And so working with a coach, working with someone else who can help you see your blind spots. I also think it's really hard to have your spouse be your other half and spot you on these things. It's just, why put that pressure on the person that you love the most? I mean, that's a lot of pressure.
No doubt. Okay. This is a personal question. What is the biggest thing that you coach that you fail at the most?
It's the habits, right? It's so easy to have them work for a season in your life. And then one change happens in your life and you have to reset how your habits work in your life. And the most recent example for me would be when we took on this foster baby, because I was walking 3 miles a day every day until the day we got her. And now I have to figure out a new habit scheme for how do I do my activity in the context of having an infant living with us. And so that, I think, over and over, something comes up in my life and I'm like, oh my gosh, now I have to reset and make sure these are all okay again. But that's what I meant earlier when I was talking about what worked in your 20s may not work in your 30s, right? And what works before a kid doesn't work after a kid. And you have to give yourself permission to realize, oh, this isn't working anymore. I don't know what I need to do yet, but this habit has to change. And so that has been an iteration for the past couple of months that it's like, okay, I need my husband to watch the baby, but I have to make sure that it's a time when he's not on a business call. I need to make sure it's not at a time where the alternative would be my children suddenly binge TV show watching on a show. I don't even know what they're watching because I'm down on treadmill. I am a treadmill person. If someone wants to walk outside, that's fantastic. It just doesn't work in my life to do that. And so for me, it's all about the treadmill, but there's no scientific reason to do that.
Here's what I see happening to me is that when I have a change, I have to drop something. So when I add something, I got to drop something or stop something. And a lot of times that thing that I stopped doing or dropped was actually good for me. So it's almost like every time you make a big change, you need to push the pause button and figure out, okay, what's my priority situation now?
Right.
Because what normally happens is you don't do that. I don't do that. And X months later, it's like, well, I'm not doing that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I was killing it.
Yeah.
I was rocking and now I'm not doing it. Why am I not doing it?
Right.
Because of some change.
Mm-hmm.
That was actually probably a good change. So how do you coach people on that?
The first step is just what you said. You have to identify that it even happened. Sometimes people don't realize it's happened until we have a conversation. I see this often where they've had some big event and 8 weeks later, they're coming in with physical symptoms. I have to say, what happened 8 weeks ago? What happened in your life? And then because of that, what happened differently after that in your daily habits? But you're absolutely right. You hit on something that's akin to boundaries too. You have to say no sometimes to things that may have been really interesting or good or beneficial. And that goes back to that priority management. You have to understand what's important to you so that you can build from it.
How do you coach people when they don't want to say no because they don't want to hurt anybody's feelings? They don't want to say no because that's part of who they are. It's part of their identity. They don't want to say no because it's the way it's always been. How do you get a mindset shift around the notion of just no gives you your power back?
I tend to ask a lot of questions is my style. I don't know that that's the only way to do it, but I do tend to ask a lot of questions. And when someone doesn't want to give something up, they don't want to say no, they don't want to have that boundary. I ask them, tell me how this is serving you. And then tell me how this is serving you in the context of this change. Because sometimes something that could serve you a little bit doesn't serve you as much as it did. And it doesn't mean you can't come back to it, but it's not valuable. It's not a value add right now. So I ask a lot of questions. I try to help them see their own thought processes and see their own thought habits, if you will, because habits are not just what we do, it's what we think.
We do what we think. Let's talk about mindset. If you were building an avatar self in this situation you're in, let's say today, having 5 kids and a husband and a practice and a coaching business and being an author and all these things you do. How do you build the best mindset? And what does that look like? And what are the critical components of just a rock? Because it kind of goes in line with faith, family, and fitness.
Yeah. So
Make it a little bit more granular, a little bit more organic in sense of how it shows up on Monday mornings.
I actually have planning time. I have calendar management planning time. And I think that's a non-negotiable appointment with myself where I lay out for the week, the month, sometimes even the year, depending on how much data I have available to me. If my faith is my most important thing, when am I going to do the things that relate to it? So for me, that happens to be reading the scriptures and studying and meditating and praying. So when am I going to do that every day? And I schedule it as an appointment. I say that taking my kids to social activities at church is important. So when am I going to do that? I say that reading and talking about the scriptures of why we believe what we believe as Christians, and the kids obviously make their own choices, but giving them the information about why I do what I do, I have to set aside time for that. And if I don't schedule it, if I'm not proactive, then I'm automatically saying no to it. And that doesn't align with what my values are, because everybody knows if you don't do something first, it won't get done. We all know there's always distractions. There's always something else competing for our attention, time, and money. So I literally schedule it in my calendar planning time, and I dedicate time for planning actually. So Friday afternoon, I'm planning what is the next week, things that are non-negotiables. So that's how faith, I make sure I have time for faith. For family, it's really important to me to cut my hours at work short in order to take my kids to and from school. On the way to school, we often go around the car and we say our prayers together. What am I thankful for? What do I feel like I need help with, etc. On the way home from school, we're talking about what was the high of my day? What didn't go the way I had hoped it would. It happened, and I don't really care, but it's kind of just on my brain and I want to throw it out there. So your listeners may know it as some form of high-low buffalo. It's what the kids love to do. And it goes back to hearing each child when all the children are together. That intentional time with them is something that I could dedicate to someone else. I could have grandparents pick them up. I could be working instead. And there is a trade-off. There's an opportunity cost to my business, right? To be doing what I am with my children instead of being in my business. But I believe that my children have the capacity to be leaders in their industries if they're given the right tools, as does every child. And so I choose to invest my time, energy, and money in that time with them, because when I'm dead, whether it's at 50 or 105, I want my children to remember my mom asked me questions. She cared about me. She encouraged me. She called me out on my bluff. She got things wrong, but she was also there with me and trying to make it right. She was what I call a good mom. And I had to define that for myself, but I want my children to be able to reflect and say, yeah, she was a good mom. When it comes to fitness, same thing. I have to schedule my time. If I don't schedule time for strength training, for mental health, I lump sauna into physical fitness. If I don't schedule regular time in the sauna, there's a lot of different health outcomes that I'm not going to experience. And then I'm not living aligned to myself. So I hope that was granular what you're looking for, but that's what I choose.
What is a word that all your children could agree on that best describes their mom?
Is that okay? They all think I'm crazy.
Crazy.
I think if you asked my children, how does mom spend her time? What are her priorities? I think they could actually tell you that it has to do with faith, fitness, and family. They may not always understand the order that I would rank them, but I do think they could tell you that because we talk about it all the time. And I hear them chiding the neighbor kids or their dads sometimes about, you can't eat that. Mom said it will cause cancer. So I know they're hearing me, but it's a lot of repetition. It's a lot of intention. And be very clear, I'm not getting it perfect. I just happen to have found a few hacks that have worked in different ways for my kids. So I don't want your listeners to take away the story that I know what I'm doing perfectly, because I don't. I need a lot of help and a lot of grace. And forgiveness is probably the word I would hope that they could take away at some point, to know that my mom forgave herself, she forgave us, and she was forgiven. Because when you can live in a state of forgiveness, you have so much more hope and room to grow.
Where can people find you?
They can find me on most of the social platforms using the handle at Dr. Amy Tiffany. They can also just go to our website, vitalitymwc.org. Anyone who wants a free copy of my book, I just ask you pay shipping and handling, but I'll send you a free copy of my book. Just reach out on the website and we'll get that to you. My challenge this year is to get this book into the hands of 1,000 women. So I need your help. I need people to know that this is a free book we will send to them. They can also go to Amazon and get it. But this is, I think, the story of change. And that is what brings hope.
Dr. Amy, is there anything you would like to add that I didn't ask?
I want people to know that there's always room to start again. And you mentioned earlier in the digital world, you just start over and you don't have consequences. That's not true in real life, right? We make decisions, people get hurt, we get hurt, and we have to live with that. But that's not the end of the story. And I believe that God has a story for each of us. And leaning into that story and understanding that call in your life will give you the most blessed experience you could have.
What's the title of your book?
It's called The Postpartum Pivot. I'll show you a picture because this is super exciting right here. It's on Amazon. I hope that your listeners will be encouraged, that they will be motivated to take that next best step, because that's all any of us are trying to do.
Amen, sister. Thank you so much for being on Pro Mindset today. Thank you for serving mankind, especially the women, and kind of being a pioneer and teaching people how to be a great mom, wife, all the things. I mean, and here's the thing that I get from you is you fill your own cup so that you can serve others. And you've got to do that because you can't serve when you don't. You can't give what you don't have.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
And I want to thank all the listeners for Pro Mindset. I want to challenge you guys to reach out to Dr. Amy and get a copy of her free book so she reaches 1,000 readers. I want to thank you for being on today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, it's Craig Domann, the host of Pro Mindset Podcast. I want to thank you for listening or watching today's show. And you can catch us every week on the normal social media platforms like YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and all the listening podcast platforms. I hope you enjoyed today's show. And more importantly, I hope you gained a Pro Mindset insight. Please be sure to rate and review Pro Mindset Podcast. And I look forward to catching up with you on our next show.